So thanks for your patience. I know that some of you had requested information earlier today, and it's getting close to the end of the day, but we were trying to get through some operational stuff, and this is the earliest that we could gather together. So it's currently the middle of the year, and when we looked at our crime stats for the year, there was a number of really good, I think, trends that we saw. Some great news for us to see. Some of the programs we saw were maybe becoming successful, or seeing some, we're getting some fruit from them. Some of those, I think, positive trends that we've seen so far has been a reduction in armed robberies over last year, as an example. We had a reduction in weapons possession over last year, year to date. We've had a reduction in theft of motor vehicle, a reduction in frauds, and some of the other offenses like that. But we've been challenged in other areas as well, and that happens in policing. And we've talked, I think, previously about things like break and enters and some of the addictions fueled offending that goes on. But the most recent issue, the issue that you're here today to discuss, I think, is around some of our more serious offenses, our violent offenses, including homicide. And until the end of June, we had about the same rate of offending as we did in 2018, if you don't include the overdose deaths where we laid charges in 2018. But in the last 10 days, we've had a number of homicides, and in the same or very close to each other in the same geographical area of the city. And so that was a real concern for us. I mean, every offense, particularly violent offense, is a concern for us, but that was specifically a concern because we knew that people who lived in that area, people who lived in Saskatoon, might be concerned about what the cause of those offenses were and whether or not that the police were doing what we could to make sure we appropriately addressed it. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about what's occurred and what our response has been. So we've had 3 homicides since the end of June, and they were in the Pleasant Hill neighborhood. And I think, as I mentioned before, I think it's unfair to use the term Pleasant Hill when describing the area, because Pleasant Hill is a big place, and although these homicides were contained within that, there are many great locations in Pleasant Hill where we're not challenged by some of the violent offending that we've seen in the last day or two. The offenses that we responded to don't appear to be related in any way to each other. The motives for offending, the victimization, the age of victims or offenders, suspects, etc., we can't find any links to each other. And so it's difficult for us to say, well, here is a trend or pattern around homicide and here's our response to it. We have, in fact, throughout the course of 2019, not seen any pattern or trend in the homicides that we've had in the city. Some are obviously gang related, and some are obviously related to addictions and other causes like that, but there is no clear trend or pattern to any of the offending this year. What we have done is, in order to make sure that we had properly addressed the community, that specific area of the city, with a feeling of safety, a perception of safety, is we've added resources there. So over the course of the next number of weeks, you're going to see an increased number of visible police presence there. There's going to be increased uniformed police officers in cars, patrol cars. You'll see increased traffic initiatives in that area, and just a general increase overall in police presence. Now, the purpose of that, of course, is twofold. One is to make sure that if there are gang activity, and if there's gang activity in the neighborhood, we'll be aware of it and we'll be able to take action on it. But more importantly, we want people to know that we care. We want people to know that we're there, we're available to them, and that if they have concerns or see anything suspicious, they're certainly able to reach out and contact some of the officers that'll be there, or call the office and know that someone is in the community and is staying in that community. Aside from our uniform presence, we also have various levels of plainclothes officers and units that are responsive to things like guns and gangs, and they will be as well concentrating on that area of the city. So I guess in summary, for us, we know that there are challenges to some neighborhoods, challenges when there are environments that contribute potentially to an environment where crime might be more prevalent. We do our best to be present in those sorts of communities. We base our resources and our responses on victimization rates. So I think that we're we're doing our best to be present and be visible, and that's our current strategy. Regarding the homicides themselves, we've got about 20 different detectives working on those homicides. We have a number of patrol officers, almost 30 patrol officers that assisted so far in the investigation over the last week here. So we certainly are well resourced. There is no limit to the resources that will apply to this neighborhood or to these homicides as we go forward. So we want to make sure that we'll assess it each day. We'll make sure that the community feels like they've been heard. And as we stabilize and have an opportunity to reach out into the community a little more, we'll have meetings with community leaders and community members and that sort of thing to look at longer term strategies. We know that enforcement like this is a short-term solution to some complicated social issues, and we also know that we have a role to play in those social issues. So we have not just invested completely the resources of our service in short-term responses, we also are involved in things like strengthening families programs, the hub model of policing, the cadet program, school liaison, that sort of thing. And we know that housing is important. We know that poverty reduction strategies are important, and those are the things that we're involved in as well. So I'm willing to take any questions, but I just wanted to come in front of you and let you know that we're present in the community. We don't see that there's any connection between the homicides that we have, and we're going to do our best to be there and be present so that people can have a feeling of being safe in their homes.
Just about the total number of homicides in Saskatoon, I know there's been some back and forth today. Can you confirm whether it is 9 or perhaps 8?
So we have, there's a classification we use that's, maybe doesn't mean an awful lot to anybody other than police officers. And so in 2018, we had 9 homicides, but we also had overdose deaths where we laid charges, and so the number 9 doesn't include those other deaths. In 2019, we've had 8 homicides and 1 case where we're still investigating. We're not sure yet if it's a homicide or not, so it's a suspicious death at this point.
So would it be more accurate to say so far there have been 8 confirmed homicides?
That's correct.
Okay. You mentioned that there's been no pattern or trends among the 3 more recent homicides in Pleasant Hill.
Right.
Even though there's no trend common to all 3 of those incidents, have police found either gangs or drugs to have been a factor in any of those 3 more recent incidents? Anything you can say to that?
Those 3 incidents are really active investigations, and so I think what I can say is that there are different motives or different offending patterns in all 3, and so they're not related to each other. But we have had cases throughout the year where gang involvement was a part of the offense, and certainly where addictions were parts of the offense, sometimes both. And so I think that units like our Guns and Gangs unit is important for us because we don't just target then a community or a neighborhood. We can actually target individuals who are at risk to offend, and that's more, I think, has more impact in the short term to make sure that people who are dangerous or potentially going to offend can be taken off the streets and dealt with through the courts.
Can you confirm that the 3 recent homicide victims in Pleasant Hill were known to their attackers ahead of time?
At this point, we have no reason to suspect anything other than that. I think that these are, as I mentioned, they're active investigations, and so I don't want to comment too far on them. But there's no, I think, based on what we know about them, there's no reason to think that anyone else is in danger because of that offense.
Chief Cooper, I just wanted to ask you about the last 2 homicides, particularly that there aren't any suspect descriptions, no suspects identified. In terms of letting the community know that they're not at risk of being, victim of a random crime, what can be said about that?
If we thought that there was a randomness to any of the offending, we would let the community know. Currently, we have no reason to believe that that's the case, and the fact that if we, just because we don't identify a suspect in the community doesn't mean we don't have suspects on these files. And so it's difficult to talk about something so active and something that had just so recently occurred. But I guess what I'd like to make sure the community is aware of is that there's no reason for us to believe that there's an increased elevated level of risk because these offenses occurred to anyone other than the victims.
So you're not seeing any common threads to the more recent 3 Pleasant Hill incidents but you're not comfortable characterizing them as random acts of violence.
I wouldn't characterize them as random, no.
Maybe just explain a little bit more about like how it doesn't meet the bar of random from a policing standpoint. Just
Well,
now.
when we think about, I think when anyone thinks about something being random, it's maybe where the offender doesn't know the victim, where they selected them, just at random. And I think that in all of the cases that we've seen this year, there's some connection between the offender and the victim, and not a level of randomness. While I won't speculate on this particular case, I can tell you that we're really quite familiar with most of the neighborhoods, and certainly with people who are involved in gang activity. So I know that that this is an act, like I said, it's an active investigation, but I can speculate or guarantee that if we had if there's a gang involved incident, that our officers are aware of the players involved there.
Chief Cooper, I spoke to the inspector from Central Division late last week, who said that there had been a pullback after the just the increase, the flood of officers in the area following the community safety
Right.
meeting in March. They had used things like overtime, pulling people in on their day off. In response to this particular set of incidents, how will police be able to flood the area once again?
So what we did in March, when we had a homicide that was involving a firearm, we were able to tackle firearm offenses particularly, and we had guns and gangs units in the area targeting offenders. We were able to do a number of arrests on outstanding warrants and that sort of thing. It was more focused on the offender than on the offense, and the people who were known to be gang members and that sort of thing. We also had traffic enforcement, we had patrol enforcement, we had visibility. And once the officers were there for a short period of time, we noticed that the call volumes to police returned to normal and were reduced in the area. A short while after that, we had issues with the children in the Pleasant Hill area. And so there was an offending pattern that was there, and we once again added resources to address that for a period of time. This is something I think that's new, and the purpose is not to suggest that there's any new threat in the Pleasant Hill area. The purpose is just to confirm to people that the police are in the area, that we're visible, that they can trust that we're there, that they know we care about the community, and that we're there to make sure that they feel safe. We are I think, resourced to address the actual offenses, but we want to be visible as well. And as I mentioned, all the preventative work we do as well to make sure that we're not just there for the short term.
How long will the increased presence last?
We're planning for a month right now, but that will gauge our response at that time again, and it's something we can continue to roll out. There's no limit on the resources that we'll expense to the area if it's necessary, but we'll play that by year based on call volumes and what we're experiencing in the community. We know that an increased level of policing to that extent is probably unwanted at some time when people feel safe. It's maybe not the only approach that's required. And so when we know that there's a handle, when we know that people can feel safe, then we'll resource it as we always have, based on victimization rates and based on science and data. But for now, we're increasing staff for those purposes. Part of Pleasant Hill, as you know, is a pedestrian area, the hospital and the areas around that. There's lots of people on foot, and that might be a more effective way to be seen in the community. So it's something we're currently assessing, and it could be done from the uniform officers that are assigned to that area.